Here to preach. Hello, everybody. My name is Riley Pickrel. For those in here that don't know me, I get to lead the campus ministry here at the Lehigh Valley Church, and I think I know that Thanksgiving is close because I felt like I was getting roasted by Brooke during the announcements right there. So it's that time of the year. That's my cheesy dad joke of the sermon. So no more. I've been living too close to Kurt. So, but again, my name's Riley Pickrel. I'm going to go ahead and pray for the lesson this morning. We're going to dive on in. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this morning, that we can all come before you and sing songs. And God, I just want to say it is so refreshing seeing James and Liz back here and just seeing old friends that came out with us 3 years ago to help start this church. God, it's just something that just encourages my soul, Father. It just puts me in a place where I am just in awe of you and all the things that you do. And God, I pray for the lesson this morning as we go to your word and we look at the story of how you brought your people out of Exodus, or out of Egypt, through the Exodus, Father. And Lord, how you're molding them into a people to reflect you to the world. I pray that we can be in awe of you, and that, God, we can be inspired to go to the world and to do the same, to show them exactly who you are. But God, we love you. We thank you for this time. And ask all this in your Son's name. Amen. And this morning, we're going to be going to Exodus chapter 19. The title for today is There's One Ingredient, Obedience. I thought that was pretty creative. But speaking, as you guys are turning to Exodus 19, speaking of Thanksgiving, I just do got to say, this past Friday, the campus and young professionals got together to have a Friendsgiving. And it was incredible, to be honest. And it wasn't even just incredible because of the food. It was just a blast. It was one of those nights, as the night rolled on, you really didn't want it to end. It was fun. The conversation was amazing. You couldn't stop laughing. Even the games that make me struggle, like Mal, those were fun. I won twice, just FYI. Yeah. It's in my notes. I was going to say that. It's not. Back there. But anyway, it was an incredible night. One of those nights that, as I've had conversations with people, we all are in agreement. We didn't want it to end. When people left the house, I remember that it was just silent, and we just kind of stood there cleaning up the kitchen, and we're like, it's boring now. Where'd everybody go? This isn't fun. But in some ways, nights like that you just don't want to end, when you're with people, that it's just fun, it's amazing. I feel like God in those moments gives us kind of a glimpse of what it's going to be like one day. Like what heaven's going to be like when we're with each other, and it's just fun. You want the time to keep going. And actually, God intended when he, we're going to get to this in the story today, when he gave the law and when he was bringing his people together to become a family at Mount Sinai, he was actually doing this. He was creating a people that now they're going to be a family that reflect his qualities to the world. And, coincidentally, that's where we're going to be going today in the passage. But turning over to Exodus 19, verse 1, I'm going to start reading. And it says, on the first day of the third month, after the Israelites came out of Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. And after they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you're to say to your descendants, to Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did in Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Just stopping there, he tells them to remember everything that just happened to them, all the things they have just experienced, what he's done for them, and bringing them out of Egypt. And I love that phrasing there, on eagle's wings. What does that mean? It means God did all the heavy lifting. That everything that needed to be done, they could just sit back. God had it at that point. When I read that, I always think of Lord of the Rings, when Frodo and Samwise are carried out on eagles from, Mordor, or wherever it is. I'm not that nerdy, but I do know that. And I think of that, but that's the way God treated Israel. He brought them, and all the heavy lifting of what he was going to do for them, he did. He brought them out of Egypt. And let's keep going. In verse 5, it says, "Now if you obey me fully and keep my command," or covenant, "then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possessions. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. Now, just unpacking a few of those words there. Priests, when he says kingdom of priests, well, the role of a priest is basically to be an intermediary between God and people. Kind of like this connecting piece that brings God down to our very level, how we can understand him and see him. And in the word holy, that's a very, it's a very religious sounding word. We hear it at church, but all it means is to be set aside for a purpose, to be different, to stand out. Almost like if you imagine, a mountain and you can see just evergreen trees. It's all evergreens and pines and spruces and things like that. And then in all that, grove of evergreen trees, there's one deciduous one, meaning there's one that's orange and that turns, loses its leaves in the fall. That to be holy, it's going to be like that one tree that just stands out. That when you look to the mountain, like your eye is drawn to that one tree because this bright color, it stands out amongst all the other ones. And that is exactly what God is actually calling the people of Israel to be this people that's completely different. The way that they live, the way they conduct their lives, that they are going to be ones that actually stand out amongst the rest of the world. And how are they going to learn this? You might be wondering, and the way God says it is that by learning it, you're going to learn it on the job. If you obey my commandments and my covenant that I'm going to have with you, that as you do that, you're actually going to learn about who I am, my character, how I feel about people, the way that I want to interact with all of my creation, because he says all the earth is mine. But you are going to be ones that actually show the earth who I actually am. It's kind of like, if you like the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like Vision. Vision is like, he's a superhero that is, he was artificial intelligence. He was all in the computer, just code. And then in one of the movies, he gets a body. They upload him to some body. The superhero becomes Vision. That's how it is like with this. It's God's going to give them the code. He's going to give them the information, but it's their lives that's going to bring that to life, to show people who he is. And it all hinges on one thing. When God says, if you obey me fully, it all hinges on obedience. Will the people actually obey God? The full potential of God's power to transform lives, to generate impact that honestly will last then generations to do that, it's all locked in with whether the people will choose to obey God here. If they'll listen to his words, if they'll trust him, if they'll choose to react in situations react the way he would to these people, with patience and long suffering, or to love people the way he does, with compassion, benefit of the doubt, foreigners, people that think differently than them, to love them the same way God does, and to acknowledge that justice will be enacted by God, that he'll take care of that. This is all in God's law that he's showing to people. And you might be wondering, now what is this law? What is God actually going to say to these people? And now we're going to keep going, verse 19. We're going to read through chapter 31. If I get the next slide. That's a joke. We're not actually going to read that. But you can. I thought it'd look it'd stand out. Those are just words. We're not going to read that. You can read the rest of this on your own time. It's a lot of scripture. But I'm going to give us a highlight, if you want to get to the next slide, basically of some of the things that stand out in God's law. Because at this time, when God's giving them the law, at this time, there's lots of other nations, and all of them have, codes of law and the way they're supposed to regulate the people and with justice and things like that. And we know these things. Through history, through archaeology, we actually know what Babylon, Samaria, Egypt, the Hittites, all these nations, what they did. And most of them are actually kind of the same. They have very similar law codes. And two of the defining features of all these different surrounding nations' codes of law are there's order and stability through justice. That means when there is a crime, there is punishment that comes from that. And then there's also distinction between nobles and kings and then common people. That typically the law wasn't going to be applied to the way kings the same way it would be to low people. They would get away with a lot more if you were noble. This is completely different to God's law. In God's law, if you read through 19 through 31, you'll see that his law applies to everybody. There's no exceptions, nobility and common people. And I threw up a few different verses up there. I'm going to read through them. In Exodus 22:25, it says, "If you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not treat this like a business deal. Charge no interest. If you take the cloak or your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it by sunset, because the cloak is the only covering your neighbor has. What else can they sleep in? And when they cry out to me, I will hear them, for I am compassionate." God wants his people not to only care about the bottom line. He doesn't want everything to be treated like a business deal. If someone's in need, help that person. And if you take a cloak as a pledge, at this time, it got cold in the Middle East. So at night, if you didn't have, if you didn't have a cloak at night, you're probably going to freeze. Deuteronomy 15, verse 1, it says, "At the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. This is how it's going to be done. Every creditor shall cancel any loan that they have made to a fellow Israelite. They shall not require payment from anyone among their own people, because the Lord's time for canceling debts has been proclaimed." That sounds nice. I would take that any day, have my debts. It's kind of just forgiven. Exodus 23:11, it says, "But during the 7th year, let the land lie unplowed and unused. Then the poor among your people may get food from it, and the wild animals may eat what is left. Do the same with your vineyards and your olive grove." So God here, He's providing for people even that don't have the means to get food. This is not something you see in any other codes of the law at the time. Taking care of the needy. In Exodus 23:4, it says, "If you come across an enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to return it." That actually, with enemies and people that you don't get along with, still treat them with respect. Still treat them with love. So this week, as we go home for Thanksgiving, if you come across an ox, return it. Don't keep the ox. So, and what's interesting about God's law is that there's two major forces at play all throughout the law. It's these two ideas of justice, because God's law is just, and mercy. Because the one thing that's different between all the other law codes is that there's mercy in God's. And what is mercy? Mercy is actually foregoing justice, foregoing what is fair and just at the time, and choosing to just do right by that person, to help them out, to do that. And these really things. This is the thing that makes God's law unique among all the other nations. And why does he do this? Because he wants them to be distinct, to be totally different. That when you see someone who is one of God's people, the Israelites, interact in the business deal, that they're going to stick out. They're going to treat you with fairness. These are the people that were going to be like the deciduous trees. They're going to stand out. But it would all be for nothing. None of this would matter if there was no actual obedience. Obedience is the key. So yesterday, me and Dennis, we got together in the morning. We spent a good amount of time assembling a smoker. So look out, Kurt. He's going to come after your smoking ability. But this thing's heavy duty. It's a big Oklahoma Joe. If you know anything about smokers, Oklahoma Joe is a really good smoker. But we were assembling it and putting it together in his garage. And I also would like to say, Thanksgiving, there's something about working outside in the cold in the garage, like doing something mechanical at Thanksgiving time. I don't know why. It's just, for me, that reminds me of Thanksgiving, because we always would do that as a kid. Work on a car. Like, all the uncles would be outside. One of them would be working on a car, and then like 6 others were just watching him work. But it was just us two yesterday, so we're putting this thing together. And we got to a certain part of it where we had to lift up the smoker, which is kind of like this big black drum kind of thing. And you had to lift it up, and we're going to put the legs on it. And this thing's super heavy. This is just a heavy-duty smoker. So as we're putting the legs on the little tubes, and then there's more tubes that these other tubes received, then we had to use a little set screw and put it all together. As we were kind of getting it there, everything was wobbly, and it was really hard to kind of get it to be secure while we were tightening the screws. It was just very difficult. And as we were doing it, Dennis says maybe we should just roll it back on its back. That way we can use gravity and just all kind of just falls down, and then we can tighten all the screws. And my initial thought when he said that was kind of like, it's heavy. I don't really want to do that. Let's just do it here. Let's just see if we can get it. But we end up doing it, and we get it on its back, and it's a million times easier. Like, it all just receives correctly. Everything gets tight. Now this smoker, like, it will last forever. This thing is this incredibly heavy duty. But it was even funny. I looked at the instructions like a minute later, and like the instructions literally say in the words, like, keep it on its back. Like, this is how you're going to do it. And there was a picture too. Like, it wasn't just words that you could skim over. Like, there was literally like an illustration of it on its back. But it's funny when you listen and obey these things that, you know, when something is intended to be a certain way, it just works out better. But also, that smoker, if those screws weren't there right and the tubes weren't received correctly, those legs, there's just a good chance that over time it was just going to get wobbly and probably damage it in some way. The smoker was not going to live up to its full potential, was what I'm trying to say, if we didn't actually listen to the instructions. And getting back to this, it's the lifestyle of obedience that God was laying out to his people to respond to situations, to treat people the way he does. This is what he was trying to do. He was trying to create a lifestyle, a way that people lived that were going to reflect him. It's not about just words on a piece of paper. It's not about what the prophets wrote or anything like that. It's about the lifestyle. It's about what people do when they're out to be different. Full obedience is what God expects. And I think today, honestly, we get that. I feel like when we read the Bible, and most of the time when we're out in the world, we're all genuinely nice people most of the time, I think, anyway. So it's kind of easy to do that. But full obedience means that in that 25% of the time, when it's harder to do something, or making, I don't know, treating someone who says something that they probably were not considering those words, treating them that way with love, those moments are the difficult ones, when fully obeying actually becomes very different. Mercy is just that, treating people with mercy in those situations. To obey is really to subjugate our own desire and replace it with God's will. So our desire just to take the easier route, to say something back if somebody, you know, makes a rude comment, or even avoid pain instead of standing up and saying something to somebody you know you should say, or telling them about your faith or what you believe, or helping them. Avoiding pain, it's often the easier way. Now, many of you know I used to work at Lowe's not too long ago. And I'll tell you, Lowe's, if you ever want to grow in patience and love for people, work retail, like, you will grow in those two areas. But there was this one day that we got this lady that came in, and I forget, I don't even remember what she bought. But anyway, she had to load it on top of her car, and someone had to help her tie it down. And one of my coworkers, associates, went to help her. 5 minutes later, he came in. He was just steam out the ears. He could not take it anymore because this customer, was just very hard to deal with. And so anyway, I get a call from the front desk, and I run up, and the front desk lady says, "Can you please go help this person? I know in the past I've seen you help people, and it seems like typically you have a lot of patience sometimes." And I don't see myself as that way, but I guess I had that reputation. And I go out, I help the person, and this guy, I can see why he was upset. Like, she was extremely difficult. It was insane. But by the end of it, you know, she was like, she was kind of looking at everything I was doing when I was trying to tie something. She's like, "Could you move it over an inch? Because I don't want it to get here." And anyway, getting back to the point. In that moment, at the end of me being patient and loving and trying to respect all the things she wanted me to do, she actually says to me, "You know what? I know I'm really difficult. A lot of people tell me this all the time. And the way you treated me during this and did all these things, you know, there has to be something different about you." And actually, I got to share a little bit about my walk with God and my spiritual journey in that moment. And it's funny because if I didn't, in that situation, choose to act in a different way, to not, you know, get frustrated, to not raise my voice or be sassy or anything like that, she may have never asked that. That never, yeah, it doesn't come out very often, Dan. But that may have never actually happened. And that's the point of all this. When we obey and choose to be different, people notice. People see that. And now, you know, like I said, Thanksgiving is upon us. We're going to go home. And we all know the holidays are never dramatic ever. When we go home this week, let's go out this week. Let's be different. I think when we have family members that we see twice a year, it's very easy to let either past feelings or when someone says something to not want to react in a way that is righteous. Let's go out this week and let's consider these things. Let's be different in that way. I think a light shines darkest or light shines brightest when in a dark place. And an opportunity where you get to actually be different. And we see this idea of mercy. It's fully expressed, honestly, in Jesus on the cross, like this. That idea that God, being perfect, would choose himself to come to forego all justice and still be just, and through the cross actually get to redeem humanity. This is where we see this idea on full display. That's who God is, and that's how he feels about us, to forego justice and treat us that way, even when we didn't deserve it. While we were still enemies of the cross, we'll read in the Bible, that's when Christ chose to die for us. And then we're called to do the same. So with that's the end of the lesson. I'm going to call the singers to come back up, and let's go out this week and let's be different. Yeah.